The morning sunlight had barely touched the quiet streets when the words that changed my life forever slipped from a trembling voice standing only inches away from me. She looked exhausted, as though she hadn't slept in days, her eyes carrying a sadness too heavy for someone so young. With tears gathering in the corners of her eyes, she leaned closer and whispered, "My dad chose you for me," and before I could understand what she meant, she added something that made my heart stop. He'd been planning this for years. I stood frozen on my front porch, unable to make sense of a sentence that sounded impossible. I had never imagined that someone else's future could quietly become tied to mine without my knowledge. Yet the faded envelope she held in her shaking hand suggested that everything she had just said was true. Before we continue, if you believe kindness, second chances, and unexpected love can change lives forever, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, share this story with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to Heart of Hope so you never miss another emotional journey. My name is Adrian Mercer, and until that morning, my life had been wonderfully ordinary. I worked as a furniture craftsman in a small town where everyone knew each other's names. My days were spent restoring old wooden tables, rocking chairs, and family heirlooms that carried generations of memories. I had never been wealthy, but I believed that creating something with my own hands was a meaningful way to live. After losing my parents several years earlier, I had learned to appreciate simple mornings, warm coffee, and honest work. I never expected my quiet life to collide with a secret that had been carefully protected for nearly a decade. The young woman standing before me introduced herself as Ilara Bennett. Her father, Theodore Bennett, had passed away 3 days earlier after a long illness. I had heard his name only once before, many years ago, when an older gentleman had quietly hired me to restore an antique oak desk. We had spoken for hours while I worked, mostly about life, family, and the importance of keeping promises. I remembered him as thoughtful and gentle, someone who listened more than he spoke. After finishing the project, I never saw him again. At least, that was what I believed. Ilara carefully handed me the envelope. It was addressed in Theodore's handwriting with only 2 words written across the front. For Adrian. Inside was a neatly folded letter that had clearly been read many times before reaching me. Theodore explained that years ago, after losing his wife, he had watched his daughter slowly lose faith in people. She had been surrounded by individuals who valued money, status, and appearances, while genuine kindness became increasingly rare. During the weeks I restored his desk, he had quietly observed the way I treated everyone around me. He noticed how I stayed late to help an elderly customer carry furniture into her truck without charging a single dollar. He watched me repair a broken rocking chair for a struggling single mother even though she couldn't afford the service. Without ever telling me, he had begun believing I represented the kind of man he hoped his daughter might one day meet. At first, I laughed softly in disbelief. Surely no father could plan something so extraordinary based on a few weeks of observation. But the letter continued. Theodore admitted that he never intended to force anything. Instead, he had left instructions that if fate ever brought us together after his passing, Ilara should simply deliver the letter and allow life to decide the rest. There would be no expectations, no obligations, only an opportunity for 2 strangers to discover whether his faith had been misplaced or wonderfully accurate. Ilara confessed that she almost ignored her father's final wish. She had spent years building walls around her heart after being disappointed by relationships that valued appearances more than honesty. She thought her father's plan sounded old-fashioned and unrealistic. Yet while organizing his belongings after the funeral, she discovered another journal filled with entries describing the conversations Theodore and I had shared during the restoration of his desk. Every page reflected his growing admiration for simple compassion rather than success. Reading those words changed something inside her, convincing her that perhaps her father had seen qualities that modern life often overlooked. Over the following days, curiosity slowly replaced my disbelief. We began meeting during daylight hours at a quiet cafe overlooking the town square. There were no grand romantic moments or dramatic declarations. Instead, we talked about childhood memories, family traditions, disappointments, and dreams that had quietly survived despite life's hardships. Every conversation felt surprisingly natural. Ilara possessed a quiet intelligence that never demanded attention, while her gentle humor slowly dissolved the sadness she carried after losing her father. Still, life rarely allows beautiful beginnings without testing them first. News spread quickly through our small community. Some people assumed Ilara had inherited significant wealth and whispered that I must be interested in her fortune. Others believed Theodore's letter was nothing more than emotional manipulation from a grieving parent. Those rumors reached my workshop, causing long-time customers to question my intentions. Orders slowed. Friends became distant. For the first time in years, I wondered whether simply accepting that letter had placed everything I had worked for in danger. The pressure affected Ilara even more deeply. Members of her extended family insisted that Theodore's final request was unreasonable and accused me of taking advantage of her emotional vulnerability. They encouraged her to move away and forget the entire experience. Watching her struggle between honoring her father's memory and protecting herself broke my heart because I knew she deserved peace after everything she had endured. One afternoon, determined to clear my conscience, I visited Theodore's old home alone. Ilara had given me permission to retrieve the restored oak desk that still stood inside his study. Hidden within one of its carefully crafted drawers was another sealed envelope I had never noticed during the restoration years earlier. My hands trembled as I opened it. Theodore had anticipated the criticism we might face. In careful handwriting, he explained that true character reveals itself not when life is easy but when kindness becomes costly. He reminded whoever found the letter that genuine love should never begin with pressure but should always survive through patience, honesty, and sacrifice. Those words transformed the way I approached everything that followed. Rather than defending myself against every accusation, I returned my attention to my work. I restored furniture for elderly neighbors, volunteered to repair benches in the local park, and continued living exactly as I always had. Slowly, people noticed that nothing about my behavior had changed. Their suspicions began fading because consistent actions eventually speak louder than rumors. Meanwhile, Ilara made a remarkable decision. Instead of hiding from the gossip, she honored her father's memory by opening a small community reading room inside his former study. Children gathered there every afternoon to read books Theodore had collected throughout his life. Elderly residents volunteered as storytellers, while teenagers tutored younger students after school. Watching the once empty house become filled with laughter convinced many people that Theodore's greatest inheritance had never been money. It had been hope. Months passed before either of us mentioned the possibility of a future together. Neither of us wanted to mistake gratitude for love. We allowed friendship to grow naturally through shared service, quiet conversations, and countless ordinary mornings. Somewhere between repairing old bookshelves, organizing charity events, and sharing coffee after long workdays, I realized I looked forward to seeing Ilara more than anything else in my life. The sadness in her eyes had gradually been replaced by confidence, and she later admitted that she felt safest whenever we simply talked without pretending to impress one another. Exactly 1 year after Theodore's passing, the town organized a memorial celebration honoring his contributions to the community. During the ceremony, dozens of people shared stories about how his generosity had quietly changed their lives. When my turn came to speak, I held up both letters he had left behind. I explained that Theodore had never arranged a marriage. He had simply believed that goodness deserved the chance to recognize goodness. His faith had not been placed in fate alone but in the belief that character could bring two people together more powerfully than coincidence ever could. After the ceremony ended, Ilara and I walked beneath the bright afternoon sky toward the same park where I had once repaired broken benches. Without any audience or dramatic music, she smiled through happy tears and softly repeated the words that had first brought her to my doorstep. "My dad chose you for me." This time, however, I finally understood their meaning. Theodore had never chosen my future. He had simply trusted that if two hearts built on kindness ever crossed paths, they would know what to do next. Several months later, we were married in a simple daytime garden ceremony surrounded by neighbors whose doubts had transformed into genuine celebration. The restored oak desk stood beside us during the ceremony, decorated with fresh white flowers. Instead of expensive decorations, guests brought handwritten notes describing acts of kindness they planned to perform in Theodore's memory. Those notes filled every drawer of the old desk until there was no space left. Looking around at smiling faces, I realized that one man's quiet belief had inspired an entire community to become a little more compassionate. Life afterward was not perfect. We still faced financial struggles, difficult seasons, and unexpected losses. Yet every challenge reminded us of the foundation upon which our relationship had been built. It had never depended on wealth, appearances, or perfect timing. It had begun with trust, patience, and a father's unwavering hope that kindness would eventually find kindness. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who still believes in second chances, leave a heartfelt comment below, and subscribe to Heart of Hope so together we can continue spreading stories that remind the world compassion still exists. Special request, before you leave, comment just one word, hope, if you believe kindness can change someone's destiny. Sometimes the greatest plans are not written to control our future but to guide us toward the people who help us become our best selves. Theodore never lived to witness the life Alara and I built together, but every sunny morning when laughter fills our home and children read stories inside the little reading room that still bears his name, I silently thank the men who believe that goodness, when planted with patience, will always bloom at exactly the right time. And perhaps that is the most beautiful legacy anyone could ever leave behind.